As they've mentioned, so Sister Penny wrote this book. It's Love, Leadership, and Influence. And there were copies. I don't know if they're all sold out, but there were copies on the table out in front. You can buy it also on the nrpastors.com website. And I believe it's on Amazon, too.
And I have some more, actually, back in the hotel room. I'm sorry, I have some more in the hotel room.
Okay.
Can we turn the lights up a tad? Is that possible? Sorry. Being high maintenance, again, that I am, I just want to see their faces a little better.
What?
They won't turn up?
That's it. Look, they're all...
Okay, I need a little spotlight I can just shine in on. Like deer, you know?
So, of course, the larger idea behind her book is just about building more meaningful and deeper relationships. It's all about relationships. And so we're going to take some of those topics that she mentions in her book, and we're going to give you a little sneak peek into them and hopefully dive a little deeper into some of the topics that have already been mentioned by the questions that we're going to ask her. So we've poised our questions or framed them in a way to draw out the information that we felt would be really good for you guys to hear. Okay, so number one. So as you approach the subject of building more meaningful relationships, the very first topic, it's actually your very first chapter, you addressed was having a pure conscience. Now, personally, this was a topic I had not really thought about before, like the value of having a pure conscience, or what does it mean to have a pure conscience, especially as it relates to our relationships. So describe what it means to have a pure conscience, and why is it a foundational aspect of building more meaningful relationships?
Okay, well, first I wanted to clarify that some people, when they think about having a pure conscience, they think that that means they have to be perfect. And that's not at all what I mean in the book. And the process that I walked through, like if you read my book, you'll see in the first chapter, I was just always doubting everything about myself. I start off talking about how I went to Bible school and I quit because I had such a poor opinion of myself. And then I went through a period of depression because I felt that I had failed the Lord. And so I just was when I would pray to God, I would always go, this is how I'd start my prayer, and I'm not kidding. I would always go, oh, Lord. And that's kind of how I'm not kidding. I would get on my knees by my bed and I'd go, oh, Lord. And then I'd start thinking about all the stuff that was wrong with me and what I needed to change. And God kind of took me through this whole process of learning what it means to have a pure conscience. And I have here a quote from the book. It says, having a blameless conscience and being sinless are not the same. One is about having our hearts sprinkled clean consistently and living under the gratifying place of peace that comes from that. The other is unattainable, about an impossible objective that no mortal has yet attained, to be constantly perfect. What I'm talking about is what we talked about today, that ability to return over and over again, and just to keep your heart open before God, just to live under an open heaven with an open heart, and to know that He's so desiring to care for you. Like, you know what I often think about? I think about, did you ever, maybe some of you have experienced this, the most amazing dad type person that you could have, that looks out for everything about you and just is always affirming you and loving you and treating you like a little princess. Who invented that idea? God. Where do you think they learned how to do that? God. So when we learn how to live under that, His heart of that, it creates your conscience being pure, because you live in a constant state of faith, not of perfection, but in faith toward God. And we talked earlier, too, about the fact that if you want to have strong relationships and you live in such a way that you're always questioning yourself and always doubting your ability or even your personality, you tend to shrink back. You tend to be intimidated, like I was at that first job interview where I said, oh yeah, I like people. Nah. Because I was always feeling like, in a crowd, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to respond. But the Lord taught me how to draw from His incredible love, His confidence in me. He has confidence in us. He has confidence in who you are in Him. And He taught me how to draw from that. So then you can actually have fearless relationships where you're not always thinking about yourself. You're not always worried about what they'll think about you or whether you have what it takes to relate well to people. You just know. You walk in that confidence that we sang in that song today about Darnell, that song about God has confidence. What was the exact line? God makes me confident or something like that. Crowns me with confidence because he does. In everything I am and everything I've learned to do, in every relationship dynamic, I have learned the same way by just laying it out, engaging with God and saying, you've got to help me because I don't know how. You do, but I don't. And he's shown me how. Yes.
Okay, we're going to hit on vulnerability in just a minute.
Yes, it does. You're right.
But you are in step.
Okay, so that's pretty...
You know, before I hit the next question, I wanted to share something that last night the Lord was just showing this to me in the worship service. And I wasn't quite sure, like, you know, I felt like it was almost the unction to, like, go speak a word, right? But, you know, you hold it in because it's like, you know, whatever. But as we kept hearing more and what you spoke about this morning and Pastor Regina as well, I want to say it because it's so important. And it's something that you guys are going to know already. But hopefully when you hear the words today, it'll just sink in a little bit further. But our battles are won in the secret place.
Absolutely.
That is where you go. You got issues. Everybody's got issues. We got struggles in ourselves and outside with others. Where you win those battles is in your secret place, in your secret time with the Lord. And when you think about it, when Moses spent intimate time with the Lord and he came out, his face shone with God's glory, right? He was changed in the secret place. And so that is where we are changed too. We come out of the secret place reflecting God's glory on our life. And that is when people pick up and go, something has changed about you. What is it? And so you talk about having more influence. Your influence grows the more you become Christ-like, and Pastor Regina mentioned that this morning, and it just all tied into what I felt like the Lord was sharing or speaking to my heart, and it probably starts with me, right? Like he was showing me that this is something that I need to apply in my life, but it's relative to us all. Okay, our next question is about unforgiveness. Now, unforgiveness is a huge issue that has affected us all at one time or another. And in your book, you really go into detail about your personal battle with unforgiveness. And although we don't really have time to recount your story, so if you want to know her story, you got to buy her book. I want to touch on and make a critical observation that you mentioned regarding unforgiveness. And you mentioned that it is possible that we could hold on to unforgiveness without even realizing it. Explain some of the signs that we can look for and the ways that, and I'm putting it in air quotes because this is how you labeled it. You said it's veiled unforgiveness. How can that manifest itself in our life?
Okay, well, one thing, I wrote like a little list of certain things, and this has kind of been obvious to me for a while because I've done them. One is avoidance. If you even in church, say you're like, steer clear, I'm going to sit over here because that person rubs me the wrong way. Disdain, when you look at certain people in your heart and you feel disdain toward them, you pretty well know what disdain feels like, right? Anybody know what that feels like? Being cynical or critical toward them. If you find yourself just when their name is brought up or even when you think of them, you just have a cynical kind of like a critical overall perspective of that person. If you feel irritated or annoyed by hearing their voice or hearing someone talk about them, especially favorably. If you hear someone talk about someone favorably and you're like, ooh, that annoys me. Or if you hear their voice and in part of the room or in your house or whatever and you're just annoyed, those are pretty good signs that you have unforgiveness that you may or may not be aware of. Obviously, a big sign that I write about in my book about my dad is he, in my mind, the relationship was irredeemable and it was superfluous to my life. I just had a little check mark that said, I really don't need you in my life. I've tried relating to you. I've tried reaching out to you. I've tried having a dad in my life, doesn't work, check mark, you're off my list. And then God challenged me at one point, said, no, you got daddy issues, and you need to go beyond that. You need to press into me and find out some things. And I had to really pray a prayer of release and forgiveness and blessing over my dad to get free of that thing that was kind of in my mind. I was okay. I was fine. I didn't really need my dad. He was out of my life. And I was okay with it, or so I thought. But God said, no, I want you to go beyond that. And then what resulted from that was miraculous. So that's pretty much.
Awesome. So, avoidance, disdain, and being critical. If you have anyone in your life that those three criteria will fall into, then it's time for you to check your heart for unforgiveness. Okay, number 3. So in your book, you talk about building equity with people. Now, I'm an accountant. That's my career. That's my profession. And I understand equity as it relates to the value of an entity, right? However, you use it in when speaking of relationships and how we have to build equity with people. So define equity as it relates to our relationships, and why is it a valuable resource?
Okay, well, you might be better, as far as equity in the financial realm. To me, it means you have kind of money in the bank toward a particular thing. Am I miss?
Well, it's the value. It's the value of an entity, because of course it's your assets minus liabilities is your equity. So It's like if you had to pay off all your debt, what would you have left, right? So it's the value of that entity. But
Okay.
how do, define it in your way you're using it?
In
as
the
far
way
as
I'm
relationships.
thinking of it is that you build into relationships in such a way that you have been consistent, you have been trustworthy, people know you have their back, they know you're not going to take something they've said and run and tell so-and-so over here. They know that talking to you is like talking to someone they can utterly and completely trust with their heart, with their life, even sometimes with their secrets. Now, sometimes, Keith and I have a hard and fast rule that we don't, quote, take confidences. Like if someone in the church comes to another person and says, I'm going to tell you this, but you can't tell anyone. Often that's an open door for saying something maybe that shouldn't be said. So we don't buy into that. But there are times when someone's wrestling with something personal or whatever, and they just need someone to partner with them. And just that you prove yourself in such a way that you have tremendous equity in their hearts and in their minds. And I talk in my book, the last chapter is about building a leadership team, building a team around you that will stand with you. And to me, the greatest way you do that is you build equity in each one of their personal lives in such a way that you trust each other thick and thin. You've got each other's backs. There's no hierarchical system going on. There's pure, unadulterated friendship. And you really know that person is covenant with you. To me, that's what building equity is. And that's what, if you want to have lifelong friendships, whether it's with your kids, your husband, people in your life, people in your I'm telling you, there's a big lack of this in the world. There is so much untrustworthiness in relationships. What's the Bible say about he that findeth a friend that is like, there's one verse about that they stick closer than a brother, but to find a friend that is true, to me, and again, friendship to me is not like, oh, I got to spend this many hours with this person because we're friends and we got to go to the mall together and we got to be on the phone every day together. No. Some of my best friends I talk to every few months. But there is a heart connection that they know if they're in need. Like Linda Jackson, we called her from the table today. She's in the hospital. I don't talk to Linda that much. I don't see her that much. But she knows I adore her. And she knows that if she's hurting, I'm hurting, and that we're going to pray, and that I'm going to love her, and that she can trust me. And so to me, that's what equity looks like.
That's very good. As you were describing that, I was thinking of some advice that my mom has told us girls growing up, because we were going to be mothers one day, but she said, you build a bridge with your children relationally and through communication while they're young, because you're going to need that bridge to reach them when they're teens. So the same thing with that, when we're building a bridge with someone, then we can use that bridge in the time of need. And had we not built the bridge of equity with that person, when they are in need, they're not going to receive from you.
Right.
You know, so for
That's
someone
right.
to receive from you, you have to have built that bridge,
You're
that
right.
bridge of equity, yeah.
I remember someone telling me one time, this was years ago when I was pastor's wife, we had a lot of young women in the church, and one woman said, look at the way that girl's dressed. She's just so inappropriate. I'm going to just go talk to her. I said, heck no, you're not. I said, number one, do you even know her? Are you friends with her? Can you speak into her life? No, you're not saying a word. So if you're friends with her and she knows you love her and there's an appropriate time, yeah, you can share something with her. But no, we don't have this right to just, you build equity in people's lives.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Okay, number 4. So you mentioned that if we desire to build more meaningful relationships, that our lives and how we interact with each other and others should demonstrate an unspoken sentiment. And I have this in quotes because I'm quoting your book. You said, I have room for you in my heart and life. That is how we should be interacting. Our lives should say that to people without words, that I have room for you in my heart and life. How can we move towards this goal?
Okay, I'm trying to think here. Okay. So, again, one of the chapters in the book is called The Power of Embracing. And I talk a lot about my mom in there because my mom was a cleaning lady most of her life. She cleaned for all kind of rich people and all kind of folks who ended up being some of her very best friends. They adored my mom because she had this embracing heart. There was like no one, no matter their station in life, rich, poor, that she was intimidated by, number one, or that she didn't welcome. Embrace means to encircle in the arms, to include, to draw in. And there's something about that that is so disarming for other people. When you think about it, when you know that someone genuinely, not just, oh, I love you with the love of the Lord. I've heard people say before, oh, I love them, I just don't like them. Baloney. Baloney, that's not God. That's just some weird saying that people came up with. I love them. People in the people that, I've heard pastors say it. I love the people in the church, but I don't like them. I'm like, man, you need a new profession. But people know when you like them. They know when you're embracing them. There's a verse in Proverbs 19:22, and it says, what's desirable in a man is his kindness. Think about that. You might do all kind of things, but kindness resonates in someone's heart. And when there's like an arrow of kindness shot into somebody's heart, they know it. They sense it. They pick up on it. And so when you embrace other people, again, it all comes from the same root of having confidence in who God is in you. When you embrace them, though, it's healing. It's life-giving. It's part of the equity thing. You can't have equity in people's life without being embracing. You can't be an austere person who's trying to influence others from an austere posture and think that you're going to have great equity. You have to have an embracing, open, kind heart in order to influence people well. Now, did you say we're going to touch on vulnerability? Because I was going to mention
We just got our 10-minute card, so I'm going to skip one,
skip
and we're
whatever
going
you
to hit the vulnerability. So, for this question, I want to set the stage. So, in your book, you share on the value of vulnerability, which is the willingness to be open and honest about our personal frailties and struggles. And I have to be very honest. And us girls, when we were talking about this, we all agreed. Okay, I avoid, and a lot of them do too. We avoid vulnerability like the plague. Okay, and I think my daughter-in-law and my mom and I talked about this very question on our way to lunch today, and how we think that it is. And Pastor Regina and I talked about it in the hallway, and she said, vulnerability is really unnatural. And I'm like, yes, it is. So when I read the chapter title, I cringed. And so before I ask the question, let's put vulnerability into context, because you did that in your book. You explained it perfectly, and this is in quotes because I'm quoting your book. You said, "I don't mean exposure of delicate information to the wrong persons who have no need to know our deep personal information and who may not handle it with wisdom." So obviously, from that statement, not all relationships can be trusted with our vulnerability. So we've got to take that into context. Some relationships, you can't just hand over your vulnerability because they're not going to handle it with wisdom. I liked that, okay? I think because, and we discussed on our way to lunch today, in my personal experience, I've had someone exploit my weaknesses, right? So in that context, it's like, okay, you can't be trusted with this anymore, that kind of thing. I'm taking it back, okay. But there was something that you stated in that chapter that we had to read over and over, and even in our discussion with my group over there, our focus group, and we were trying to understand it, and we were trying to digest it. So this is your statement. You said, "To be vulnerable is to be at risk of being hurt," right? We know that. "But the benefits outweigh the risks." Well, we would like for you today to explain the benefits of vulnerability and why is it something we should pursue. And I'm saying this honestly, you really need to convince me.
Well, it's kind of interesting, in raising up more than just one leadership team around me. I was purposefully vulnerable about my own weaknesses. Like one time, for instance, my grandma died, and the funeral was an hour away, and none of them came to the funeral. And I was really hurt because we had a several-year-long, really, really close relationship. And so our next meeting together, I just started bawling. I just said, I was really hurt none of you guys went to that funeral. And, of course, they were like, "We're so sorry we didn't, it was just so where we weren't thinking, And to me, what I've discovered is that we are people that need help from one another. God didn't create us to be all walled in and just "I got this, I'm good," And there are times where we really need each other. And in that needing one another, it requires us to be very real. And yeah, you have to use discretion. I also said as a quote that vulnerability isn't leading with your insecurities. "Oh yes, let me just tell you about myself. I'm an idiot and I do this and this." That's not what I mean. But one thing that taught me is John Wesley, who was the founder of the Methodist religion. I read a book called John Wesley's Class Meetings, and they would get together once a week and with small groups. They had small groups. And every small group had a leader, and they would confess their sins one to another and pray for one another. And the leader was not exempt. The leader also did that. And the purpose of that is, to me, number one, being authentic. Knowing what's appropriate. I don't share, let me tell you about Keith. Let me just tell you about all Keith's issues today, Or my kids, or other people's frailties. That's not what I mean by vulnerability. I mean letting people see past the veneer and I feel like sometimes Christians have so much pressure on them to be perfect and to hold this standard that is, and I have seen pastors, we talked about this at lunch, pastors lose their ministry, lose their family, lose their church because they absolutely refused to be vulnerable and say, "I'm having a problem with lust." Oh, they would rather lose everything that they had than be vulnerable with someone, some people in their lives and say, "Somebody's going to help me. I'm struggling." And I just found for my own self, it was always better for me to be open and to share things with people than to suffer in silence and just to hold it back and just, I got this. Me and you, God, that's all I need. I've learned to be, and I can promise you this, it has not made people respect me less. Now, there are people, even during that church split, they used some things that I shared about struggles Keith and I were even having that I shared more about myself than anything, but they used that in a wrong way. There is definitively risk, but I would still much rather not be afraid to be humble, to be genuine, to lock arms with other people in times of struggle than to put on this thing where you have to be. I remember years ago, there was one time I was like, there's this issue in my life, and I really feel like I need to confess it to some people in my life. And somebody said, no, you're a leader. You don't do that. Leaders don't confess things about. You have to maintain this posture, and you have to present yourself as a leader, whatever that means. I mean, a leader is someone, again, like I talked about earlier, that influences and loves those around them. That initial verse that we looked at, that leaves a fragrance, that touches other people's lives with the heart and the character of God. And I think some of the healthiest people are vulnerable people. They're not afraid. They've learned how to live more fearlessly. They're not afraid of who can hurt them. And again, you're not going to be an idiot, and you're not going to tell this person over here that's completely untrustworthy things about your life. But there are people in your life that you're not afraid to be completely. There's a pastor's wife in the network, and she had gone through some really hard things in her life. And due to that, she was very kind of cold in some ways, austere, stepped back from people, and this had gone on for years. And finally, she was able to share with me, after years of being friends, what had gone on, some of the things, and how she saw people, and how she related, and how she saw herself. The woman is a changed woman. Not only has she confronted that issue with that person that caused her so much pain back in the day, but she is so outgoing and so out there and puts herself out there all the time, which is night and day from 5 years ago. So to me, the benefit of vulnerability with the right people in the right setting at the right times is invaluable. So I don't know whether I convinced you or not, but.
Well, I think that leads to the reciprocal, meaning that if we're going to have women that are going to start trusting these trustworthy other women in their lives and open up to be vulnerable, that we need to be ready to come alongside of that person without the judging.
Right, 100%.
But, and you mentioned something, and I don't have the page number, but something that I remember in your book, and you talked about, I think it was the chapter on friendships, and how we're to come alongside our friends in a way that empowers them. Right? Like, what can I do to help you in this? Right. I want to empower you. I want to see you walk out God's plan for your life and the authority that He's giving you. So what can I do if it's just to sit and listen, right? But so if we're going to start a revolution here, and we're going to allow each other to be more vulnerable and not and so that they can be healed and whole and moved on, then we need to be ready to come alongside that person to empower them and not to share their vulnerability with others, right? One of the things that, if I've learned anything from being in a ministerial family, is that you might hear a whole lot, but you don't need to say anything. And the reason why you don't is because it's not your story to share. Right. It's the other person's testimony to share and story to share. So you're just an observer, right? But we will come alongside of our sister in Christ and help them in that vulnerability in any way that we can. We have to be ready to act.
Well, I know we got to close in a second, but I was recently at a leadership meeting in a church, and one of the leaders, a pretty major leader in the church, said, "You mean it's okay at times to share even with our pastor things that we're really dealing with, because I'm afraid that I'll be disqualified from that role." And I'm like, wow, well, I'd be disqualified over and over and over again then. But yeah, you have to be willing to do that. As Miss Dawn said, the last 10%, right? Sometimes you have to share the last 10% with somebody and really be open. But like Mia's saying, then that puts a requirement on us to be trustworthy, to have that equity, where people know when they come to you, first and foremost, you're not going to judge them. You're not going to look down on them. You're not going to be like, are you kidding me? That's what you think, or that's what you did. There's zero room for that. All I have to do to cure that in me is look in the mirror. That's all I got to do. So there's never any room for that. Then a lot of discretion and a willingness to speak to that person. Like, say it's something they need to share with their pastor or their pastor's wife because they need help or something. The willingness to say that, not just to listen. Although listening is important. There's a lot of people that don't listen well. they're so busy talking that they don't listen well. That's a hard word for some people, but learning how to listen is really important. And that means you don't talk, and you give your full attention to what that person has to say. You're not formulating an intelligent answer. You're listening. You're taking it in. You're not like, well, it's my turn to talk. You just want to hear their heart. And then when you do, if God gives you maybe even a bold word or something to say, then be willing to say that.
Awesome. Well, we had a couple more questions, but our time is up, and we hope that you enjoyed this one-on-one interview.